Welcome. This is the first iteration of the Modern's New Modern exhibition lecture series, and I'm so glad that so many of y'all came out on a Saturday afternoon to spend it with us at the Modern and with these incredible artists. My name is Tiffany Wolf-Smith. I am the newish curator of education here at the Modern Art Museum, and I'm so happy to be starting up this program and to see that our audience is here for it. It's very exciting. So before I introduce our guests for this evening, I want to do a quick plug for some of what you might have seen on these slides behind Justin and Jonah up here. We have a few public events coming up also surrounding this exhibition, Sunset Corridor. We will be screening Jonah Freeman and Justin Lowe's films, San Trilogy and Nova Heat, on both Saturday, October 12th at 2 p.m. and then again on Thursday, November 21st at 6 p.m. And those are open to the public. We also have the Big Media Studio Workshop that's coming up in the Education Department. It's all day Saturday, November 12th. And it will focus on some of the conceptual ideas from Sunset Corridor. It'll be led by teaching artists and collaborative duo Melanie Clemens and Zach Lloyd. For information about any of these programs, it's on our website, and there's also registration links for anyone who's interested. I also want to shamelessly plug there is artist-made merch in our shop for this exhibition, which is exciting. Justin said it's their first foray into fashion, so you're going to want to check that out. There's also some signed catalogs and other texts in there specific to this exhibition. This is a beautiful publication, and there's a really incredible interview between the artist and the curator in this book, so check that out. So now on to this afternoon, and I'm going to keep this short because I know you want to hear from these guys and because I have insider knowledge that they have about 400 slides to show you today, so we want to get to it. So I hope you all had an opportunity to take a stroll through Sunset Corridor. It opened this weekend by the artist duo Jonah Freeman and Justin Lowe. This exhibition was made possible in part by support from Scott Mueller, so thank you to Scott Mueller. I'd also like to give a big thanks to the Modern's assistant curator, Claire Milliken, who brought this incredible exhibition to the Modern, and it has completely transformed Gallery 14 in this unimaginable way. Jonah Freeman and Justin Lowe's groundbreaking work bridges the realms of art, architecture, and immersive storytelling. Freeman and Lowe's large-scale architectural installations have captivated audiences not only here but worldwide and transport viewers into a richly detailed alternate reality that explores the intersections of technology, subcultures, filmmaking, and humanity, future and past. So this afternoon, we are honored to delve into the long history of the San universe and a bit more about their latest creation, Sunset Corridor, which is the compelling 14th chapter of their San universe. San is a fictional world drawn from the futuristic theory proposed by Herman Kahn and Anthony Weiner in published work, The Year 2000. The text was actually published in 1967, and it projects into the future of the California coast. The authors predicted that San Diego and San Francisco would merge into a single massive metropolis by the turn of the century. So as we all know, that didn't happen. We are several years past that prediction date, yet Freeman and Lowe have built a parallel realm that imagines a very different trajectory. And in Sunset Corridor, they weave a sprawling meta-narrative about counterculture, technology, rebellion, with a beating punk rock heart. Sunset Corridor is a space that feels both familiar and alien and will invite you to explore a futuristic universe that reflects some of your own realities. Freeman and Lowe began their collaborative journey in 2007. I was exposed to them in their first show at Hello Meth Lab in the Sun at Ballroom Marfa in 2008. Since then, their innovative approach has led to exhibitions and projects all around the globe, including Black Acid Co-op in New York, Shadow Pool at Mocha, Los Angeles, and permanent installations like, and I love the title, Artichoke Underground in Dusseldorf. So this afternoon's talk offers an extraordinary opportunity to hear directly from the artists about the history of their collaborative practice and Sunset Quarter's place in that long lineage. So silence your phones, but take photos, and buckle in for Jonah Freeman and Justin Lowe.
Hi, thanks for coming. So we're going to start at the very beginning with our first exhibit, Chapter 1, called Hello Meth Lab in the Sun, which happened at Ballroom Marfa in 2008. But we began conceiving of it in 2007, maybe even as early as 2006. And both Justin and I have been working in the realm of environmental installation, making environments, and we had studios across the hall from each other, and we started just chatting casually late at night about various ideas that we could do. And then this opportunity came up to propose something to Ballroom, and we thought of the craziest idea we possibly could, and then they went for it. And here we are today, 16 years later. Just kept going and going. So the image you're seeing on the screen here is the entrance to Ballroom in Marfa. We swapped out their original entrance and put in this storefront, and to try to make it seem like a country doctor's office. And so here you are in what would be the waiting room and a hallway. We put a community bulletin board, which we filled with astrological charts and snapshots. This led you into what would look like an abandoned domestic space. And so, part of the idea of what we were conceiving of at that time was that you would have this slow fade into this very strange reality. And so we had all this kind of prosaic architecture where it just sort of seemed like it had been vacated recently. And then you could see like someone left some belongings on the floor, some paintings, an old mattress. One thing you can notice here, there's a microphone sticking out of the mattress, and that leads to something that you'll see later in the installation. And then you make a left into a kitchen that has been totally incinerated and burned, which we had to burn ourselves in.
And get called back for because it was still burning. We made friends with the fire department.
Yeah, it was a good thing. When we started this in Marfa, we had 2 months to install, and since this was our first project of this scale, we needed that, and we were able to do things like burn an entire kitchen, just because it was a real Wild West scenario. So it was an auspicious place to start. So in these, we took each element of the room and burned it individually and then reconfigured it. And so the title is Hello Meth Lab in the Sun, suggests a meth lab, but the general concept for this show was we were going to put 3 types of social space together and sort of create a trinity of spaces that would, in juxtaposition. So one was a clandestine meth lab. The others would be these sites of industrial power and production. So that was manifested in an Upper East Side apartment. And then a hippie commune. And this seemed like there was some symbiotic relationship and antagonistic relationship between all these 3 elements. And this is something that we've gone forth with throughout our entire career thus far.
I think that initially the idea was, how to juxtapose 2 different kinds of kitchens, 2 different kinds of cooking, and this idea of cooking being analogous to alchemy, right? And so how do you arrive at sort of a third state out of two completely different things, you know? So, you know, you had this idea of like Sudafed becomes meth or vegetables become broth. And that is also something that you can see a little bit later about the ways in which we would talk about sculpture, you know, how marble can become flesh, or, you know, there's just this transference of materials, and materials offering up a kind of fictional narrative that can tell a story about who inhabited these places and what's happened in their absence.
So here you can see, we're getting close to the meth lab element, but you can see there's some monitors here in this space, and so that microphone that was embedded in the mattress in one of the rooms previous to this, it starts to become really apparent here that this whole environment is under surveillance. And so we had auditory surveillance, and we had video surveillance and all that. So this is, you know, a situation where this was kind of the surveillance room.
And all of the town of Marfa's Mountain Dew stock.
Yeah. So there, and this like a Walkman that's embedded in the wall was like recording audio tape. We actually did wire them to have tape loops that were recording, but they broke on the first day. So this is a view into the meth lab proper. So we did a lot of research as to what meth labs would look like on the internet. We never actually got to visit a meth lab. And then we made this, we made a yoga loft up above the meth lab that we covered in cutouts from Fangoria magazine. And then we shot a video of someone doing yoga in a cemetery.
Yeah, it's Matthew Barney's ex-wife.
Yeah. There you can see her.
So the title, which is obviously kind of titillating in a way, came from a kind of like misrepresentation of a Neil Young song, Hello Cowgirl in the Sand. So that became Hello Meth Lab in the Sun. And that was sort of came from a studio visit I had with Andrea Zattel, who was doing projects in Joshua Tree, and she was complaining about all the meth labs there. And I just sort of thought how beautiful it would be if those things came outside of, you know, whatever situation they were in, and actually outside in the sun of Joshua Tree, and how kind of captivating that would be. And it took, you know, several years for that to kind of come into fruition. Here's one of these situations where this sculptural material, the kitty litter, is used as a method of like filtering.
Air filtration. So meth labs give off a lot of smell, so they use kitty litter to filter the exhaust of the air. So we decided to take kitty litter and make busts of them, and so we used plaster and kitty litter and wigs. And then we put them in this room that's extremely bright. And so those of you who've seen upstairs know that like lighting, intensity or lack of lighting is something we do frequently in our installations as a way to sort of modulate your experience of space.
This is also the town's recycling. We really kind of took apart the town. It was a bit of like a kind of excavation of different homes and estate sales and just whatever kind of like municipal property we could gather. Like for instance, that floor there is from someone's kitchen.
So this was the example of the kind of like, you know, establishment industrial power site, and we sort of made this into a Tony Uptown museum, and we had these pictures on the wall. They're all black and white pictures of what would seem like an upper class, like almost cult-like situation. Could it just be a party? Could be some kind of ritualistic environment, and so these were hanging on the wall, and this sort of peered into maybe people who might be either inhabiting these spaces or controlling these spaces. This is one of the stills where there was many, many pictures, and this is a motif that we have repeated in several installations after that, or several projects rather, where we don't have people in our environments. We don't really have figurative sculpture or anything like that. It's sort of a presence through absence as far as humans go. But you do have these pictures on the wall of these kind of like people who may have been inhabitants in a past era.
And this is also where the cactus crystal combination began that would become further articulated later.
So here you have the breakthrough into the space that would be the sort of so-called hippie commune, which was, in this particular case, was really based on Drop City, which was one of the first intentional communities in Four Corners. I believe it was in Colorado. And they made a bunch of geodesic domes out of like found materials. So we did the same. We got all this reclaimed wood.
And these jars were kind of almost like a collection of like the palette of everything that we were working with. At the end, there was an idea of to clean up just by organizing these things into creating almost a kind of lexicon of the materials that we used.
So this is upstairs. It was a two-story environment, and this was another kitchen. And here is your auditory surveillance. We embedded a reel-to-reel machine in the table with tape loops, which also broke on day one. And then that's the exterior. So you would actually come out of the refrigerator and you'd get into ballroom prop. You would see the actual gallery and the normal interior of the space, and you could look back, and there was all these speakers that were wired into the surveillance system that would be playing that, like, it was on a delay, so it would play, the idea was it would play back what you may have said while you were walking through the installation to give you a kind of spooky, like, oh, I was being recorded the whole time, which, feeds into the meth paranoia vibe. So we're gonna move on to what was we did this show, that show traveled twice. It was in Miami during Art Basel, and then it went to Deitch Projects in New York, and it changed each time. And then our next big project was in 2010 at a Schindler House in LA. We were invited by this fellow Christian Streich, who was a curator, and he had a project called Country Club, and he had rented this house, and he wanted us to come and do a project. And being sort of architecture heads in a way, we were very excited to go work in a Schindler House. And those of you who know about Schindler, he's one of the most famous architects in 20th century LA. Him and Neutra built a lot of the modernist architecture that's famous there, the case study houses and things like that. And the houses are generally very protected, but in this particular situation, the house was not protected, so we could go do our thing. And so I'm gonna show you this is the house. It's right by LACMA. It's in great condition for a Schindler house. It was built in 1931, I believe. That's the interior of the house. And so what we did, the first thing we did is we went and we staged a party for what would be a kind of psychedelic therapy session that would have occurred in the early 60s, sort of proto-counterculture. And so we got a bunch of friends together. And it being LA, it was kind of easy to do this type of thing. Yeah. And so now you're seeing the installation. So what we did was we resheathed the entire interior of the space, and we then aged it as though it had been abandoned since the early 60s.
Which was a bit of a thing that we sort of draw on, because some of the Schindler houses had been abandoned and had actually been kind of like a squat for like strange architecture students. So there was some bit of kind of a reenactment of that. But we worked with a scenic painter to create all of this kind of entropy and degradation. And then we even got a little bit further into this idea of surveillance, so there are these mirrored tubes that pierce walls, so you can have these views of different rooms from different vantage points. So and once again, it's sort of like treating these installations as a body. So there's a sort of corporeal effect. So you're linking, these kind of like organs with via veins or, whatever, cartilage, So you have these connective points.
And this is when we started to really bring in the graphic design, where you have this, these logos and different things, and we started to this is when we started to really begin to flesh out a fictional narrative in a fictional world. We created this whole narrative of these people who lived here, this guy named Dr. Arthur Cook, who was a psychedelic therapist, and we had both been reading this book, Acid Dreams, which was really about the history of LSD, and not the main history of the counterculture of the late 60s, where it was sort of the tune in, turn on, drop out culture, but a lot of the stuff that it was used as a weapon of mind control for the CIA, and when it was also used as psychedelic therapy, and there was all this rich, unearthed history at that time, a lot of which is known a lot more of now, that it's become more mainstream psychedelic therapy, but at that time it was very unknown. So we conceived of this sort of alternative narrative of this house, and here you can see the surveillance in there. And then we had this, staged another photograph of Dr. Arthur Cook when he went to Asia, and had a branch of his cult there.
The Star Chamber.
The Star Chamber. And here is an example of a room that looks like it was unearthed there was an earthquake in just one room.
There was a lot of just taking pictures of sidewalks.
And here's more of this audio surveillance. And we took the kitchen and turned it into a cactus garden. So in this case, we hadn't yet got to the point where some of the works in this exhibit here, Sunset Quarter, we have cast cactus, and they're more sculptural. These are real cacti. But you'll see here, we did our first plant mineral hybrid sculptures at this time, which were these 3D modeled and 3D printed. And this was the era when 3D printing was really new, and 3D modeling was very intensive. It took 400 hours to print these.
Yeah, there was more information in one of those sculptures than there was in the Zaha Hadid piece,
House.
right?
Yeah. The people who were helping us were working for Zaha Hadid at the time, and they were like, this is bigger than her opera house as a file. So now we're on to Stray Like Gray, which is, it was in 2012, and it was our first show with Marlborough Gallery. After that, we signed up with Marlborough Gallery, and we had a sort of almost 10-year time working with them, and this was the first installation we did. And so the first room in this piece was an art gallery, because it was in Chelsea. It was a big, fancy Chelsea gallery in New York City, and so again, this idea of having a sort of slow fade into this unreality, we made the space seem like what would be in this neighborhood, which was an art gallery. And we made some paintings for this art gallery. And
of course, this was a really giant kind of mega gallery that we've, apparently in the beginning, it seems like it's quite small.
Yeah, so we made the gallery quite small, and then you go through the art handler's closet, where there's some posters of old Marlborough shows, R.B. Kitai and Francis Bacon, some of the luminaries that show with Marlborough. Marlborough had been around since the 1940s, and had shown, it was known for Francis Bacon and Lucian Freud, but then also Rothko and all the abstract expressionists. So they had this very rich history of post-war art, and here we were kind of disturbing that. And then you go through the art handler's closet into a bathroom.
And then into another bathroom.
And then there was another bathroom. And these were apparently so convincing that one little kid used the bathroom. And so then you would go through the shower, and then through another wall, and then you would be in this hallway. So now this idea that you've kind of left the gallery into some neutral space of a kind of just generic office building, New York office building.
And the thing with that, in the back in that previous slide, there's actually an Ad Reinhardt on the wall. We had access to the Marlborough collection, and so
Just put some Ad Reinhardt's on the wall.
whatever, casual like.
Yeah. So then you went into an OTB type space, which is off-track betting, which there was at that time. In 2012, they were kind of phasing out. There was a lot of them in New York City. They don't really exist anymore. There's kind of a new thing going on there. But anyway, we went and bought like the bulletproof glass from the off-track betting that was closing, and we created this space. We made a video called Fast Food Porn, which was all the fast food icons.
Copulating.
Yeah, so like Hamburglar and Ronald McDonald and things like that.
Oh, they remember the payphone?
We would put a payphone in there. Another breakthrough, and then this led you into what would be a kind of like mechanical room, and this was all created with, all those tubes you see are all cardboard tubes that have been painted, faux finished. And
This was sort of based on this place called Kowloon City, right? Which is one extensive interior, right? Like there is kind of no outside.
It's like a massive sort of housing project in Hong Kong that sort of grew together, and it was like everybody was sort of running their own electricity and maybe running their own plumbing, and everything was sort of overlapping. It was total chaos, and I mean the conditions I think were really terrible to live in, but when you see pictures of Kowloon City, it's just a remarkable like urban state. So we took that as an inspiration for this. And then you had this room that we took circuit boards from, and like all various electronics and wires and stuff like that, and covered them all with salt. So you'd go in here, and this room was completely covered with salt. There was salt all over the floor, salt and glue covering everything, which is a motif.
It's sort of like a corroded battery, is what it kind of resembles. Which
we've repeated. So you're starting to see motifs that are like present in the show upstairs and were present all the way through our work. And then you would go up a stairs, and then you would land in what would be like a doctor's office. And there was, we actually got all these countertops from an old doctor's office, and the chair, and you had your office phone with some syringes, and here you had some crystals and some plants growing out of the phone. Some biohazard waste. And this kind of looked down on what would ultimately be a kind of like a Chinatown mall type kiosk store. And we made this collage out of beach towels that we got in Venice Beach, and we made all these fictional advertisements for various products that would be here. And then we made all the products. So we did all this graphic design and made all these sort of fictional items that presumably would have some sort of narcotic element to them, although it's opaque. More of these towel collages.
I guess that wasn't really our first foray into fashion. Yeah. Sorry.
And then we have some of these cakes, some of which you can, there are not these cakes are not in the show upstairs, but there are, we continue this ceramic cake and with airbrush imagery. We made some piñatas. There's a Picasso cake. There's some gay porn. The video store, and then you would bust through, and then you're back into this what would be a mahogany library. And in this case, we had some oil painting that our friend Delia Brown made a painting for us of that, and then we
the Annabelle Bale.
Yeah, we created a fictional artist, which she was so on board for all of that, which was cool, and she's a very skilled portrait painter. And then we made all these fictional book covers, and this was this whole library of books. And then you would go into, so there you can see some of these titles. You Have Been Disconnected, Pop Star, Brown Tar. And then you would go into this room where we had these plant mineral hybrid sculptures. So this is, again, this is where we'd just come from the 3D printing of these 3D model items, and then we're actually taking cacti and minerals and crystals and different kinds of rock and merging them together in a sort of assemblage, which would lead to what we were doing later.
So we go out and kind of excavate cacti, or have people that, maybe friends that lived in Joshua Tree, would find things and ship them to us. And this collaboration between us is one thing, but then it extends out. There's a lot of people that kind of help to contribute to these projects. And that's just one of the areas that, helped us out.
So this is the next project we're going to look at is Artichoke Underground, which was in 2013, and this was at the Art Basel Unlimited, which is a section of Art Basel where they do singular installations by artists. It's not really, it's in the art fair, but it's like more like a big museum quality exhibit where they do monumental sculpture or big installations by artists or solo shows. And so we did this like freestanding structure called Artichoke Underground. And this is in the sort of Messaplatz in Basel, and this is just this plywood structure. And you would again go through a closet into a hallway. It would have the pin boards and the mail, and then you were in a waiting room, and there's an RB Katai, which we also borrowed from Marlborough. And then you're in what would be like a sort of storage closet with the boxes. And then you got into what was the Artichoke Underground. And Artichoke Underground was essentially a sort of free press type space that was like a counterculture press, like an Oz or like an East Village Other or something like that. And so this was our sort of interest in like alternative media and in sort of the like counterculture media environment, which definitely leads into the Smile Pentagon series and into Sunset Corridor. So we actually got like a big printer, and we got silk screens, and we got all these cans of ink, and then we made the covers for all the Artichoke Undergrounds, and we made all these paintings with silk screens, and so we just created this whole environment. And then this particular piece is now on long-term display in Dusseldorf at the Sammlung Flora. And then we put a lunch counter, which was based on the Punjabi lunch counter in the East Village, where we like to eat from time to time. And this is where the rice sculpture came in. So these were the first rice sculptures that we did.
And then the first and maybe last time we ever did food faces, which I was always a big fan of.
Yeah, we got some Indian food and did a photo shoot of some food faces. So this is in the exterior. Here are some details of that environment, which is more the fictional Artichoke Underground covers. There's one of the guys who built the piece looking through the portal. Here's our cans of ink and paint that we made. There's an actual Artichoke Underground zine that we made. Some more of the books of our fictional library universe. Some cactus crystals.
We did this in 3 days.
Yeah, this was really, I mean, we pre-built it in New York City, but then we had to install in 3 days because of the structure of Art Basel.
But other jokers were taking like 4 days to hang a painting.
Yeah. Some more salt-covered electronics. So we'll just move through this. More plant mineral hybrids. The DVDs, this was the beginning of our DVD universe.
Which came from, on the way to LAX, there was a place called Jungle Video. And I never got to go in, and I don't think it exists anymore, but it had a fascinating title. So that's kind of made it into some narrative components as well. But it was the idea, it was like, oh, well, let's just make our own Jungle Video, whatever that is. And we just started to kind of generate fake titles.
So this next piece we're going to get to is Scenario in the Shade, which started in 2015, but then toured around Europe and for 4 years or something like that. The last one was in 2018. And so you would go through a porta potty, and then you'd get into this Victorian room with the piano and some collage. Some of these elements have actually made it into Sunset Corridor. And then you would go through that room into what would be essentially like a kind of junkyard of with just all reclaimed wood and scaffolding and all kinds of different things.
And this is also the beginning of making installations as sets for movies. So this will all find its way into a film.
Yeah, we built this first as a set and then shot it as a film, Scenario in the Shade. And so the San trilogy is 3 films: Floating Chain, Scenario in the Shade, and Mercury City. And in a moment, I'll show you a few minutes of Mercury City, which is the 3rd chapter in the San trilogy, which we'll screen later in the month here. This is more towel collage. And then here is our uptown retail environment with fake advertisements and cakes and fictional products. So you're seeing kind of through line here. So there's some details of that environment. All the material we've collected. So some more of the cakes here. So now we're into this piece called A Cell in the Smile, which is an underground bunker in Cleveland, which is the beginning. It's the first chapter of the Smile Pentagon, which is five installation works, Sunset Corridor being the 5th. And so we started this by making the last chapter of the San trilogy called Mercury City. And so which we shot on location in Cleveland, and then in some sets that ended up in the underground bunker, which is a 5,000 square foot bunker that's 27 feet underground. And somehow we convinced the collector to let us do this. So here's the first few minutes of Mercury City.
Mercury City. Cleveland, Ohio is cast as San, a beachfront metropolis located somewhere on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. The protagonist, Harper, is a surveillance expert investigating a band of techno-hippie spooks that have seized control of the San from a corporate entity known only as Friedrich Barris. Through a combination of 3D video, audio osmosis, and bathtub narcotics, she is able to achieve direct penetration into the consciousness of her subjects. When she discovers that her faceless employer has stolen her patented technology, she fears that she has become the focus of investigation. Now in a feedback loop of extrasensory paranoia, her only hope is her love interest, a jovial cyborg named Andy. Only he can break the cycle of psychic invasion. Harper and Andy escape to a medieval resort where a cross-eyed guru is performing group hypnosis as a means of identity erasure. After full identity transformation, she emerges as Charlotte, a bubbly textile designer from Anaheim. But soon enough, San is overrun by phantom riots. Harper and Andy escape immersion into communal isolation tanks. They enter into a state of conjoined hallucination in which the world is populated by a series of furniture displays. Showroom ensembles have become wise sentient beings that guide them to a paradise they never could have imagined. They descend into a jungle maze that is being used as a laboratory to synthesize powerful pharmaceuticals. The lab's concoction, known as jungle video, is being surreptitiously administered to large swaths of the urban population. Harper and Andy frantically search for an antidote. They find an ancient serum that will reverse the effects of the drugs through artichokes, 20th century optics, and Belle Epoque interior design.
Okay, so it's a little taste. If you want more, you can come back for, there's about 85 minutes more of that. So this leads us to our underground bunker. So this is a field where this is a sculpture park outside of Cleveland, Ohio. This collector named Scott Mueller, who actually generously supported this exhibit, is building, and he's got all manner of amazing art there. There's some Terrell and a Richard Serra and a Anish Kapoor and all kinds of great things. But when we were invited, he wanted things above ground, but since we make interiors, it didn't make sense to make a building above ground, so we asked if we could bury a sculpture. He liked that idea, so this is the entrance to that sculpture. And you go down the stairs, and then you immediately enter into what appears to be a natural history museum, where we made these full-scale dioramas.
We spent a lot of time at the Natural History Museum, and we're even invited backstage there to understand how everything is built and what a kind of weird operation it is. You think that there's just endless funding, but they're going out and casting things in Central Park at midnight, and
it's a
their
much
vacuums
more
don't work, and it's totally amazing.
slapdash type thing. So this is more of the plant mineral hybrid sculptures. These are the full-scale dioramas where we did oil painting backdrops on these semi-domes, and then made the foreground sculptures, all of this, like sort of more plant mineral hybrid environments, as you can see. And then you get in, this is a giant rock sculpture we made. There is a giant plant mineral hybrid, like sort of as one that's sort of grown together. So this is about 5 feet tall and 8 feet wide. Here's some where the plant mineral hybrid is merged with some of the products of our concoction. Here is the world of our printed ephemera and collage, which is a motif that's, definitely, as you can see, has been going since the beginning. We have this vast image archive that we've been compiling since, about 2006 or so, just scanning imagery, collecting imagery, sort of creating folders by subject so that we can always refer back if we want something that's about, music, we have that. If it's like about cults, we have that. Nature, whatever might suit us. So like I said, this piece is called A Cell in the Smile. And so this was the beginning of this trilogy that's really, not trilogy, this 5-part installation series that it really is around information technology and this idea of an alternative information network. And we, in this process of making these installations, we were very fixated on California, San being set in California, and just the post-war environment of California and what would be considered the California ideology, which would encompass this kind of the relationship between counterculture, but then Silicon Valley and a lot of the aerospace and the information technologies and the things that were really coming out of Silicon Valley, but also Los Angeles, the entertainment industry, and how these things are connected. This sort of idea of trying to imagine a new world, and trying to imagine alternative ways of living, and how that kind of like merged with industry and the things that then were exported throughout the world and began to really define our world to a great degree, with the internet being the most salient example of that. And so we imagine this to be the kind of laboratory for where this alternative information network was being developed.
So this is all this medical equipment that we were able to purchase in Cleveland, and everything is just sort of refashioned for our own purposes, and there's some narrative twists to it all. And you know, in bunkers, of course, you have to have food and beverages and everything that you would need to exist underground. So this is more of our own inventive kind of inventory.
And here's the office for the inhabitants of this bunker, who we imagine to be this woman, Adita Smiley, who was a mechanical engineer and an information scientist. There's a little bit about her in the Nova Heat film that's upstairs, but this is where she was working and kind of working this idea of creating this alternative information network, which was is a biotech thing. We imagined it to be, instead of it being metal and electronics, it was done through biology and sort of it was in neurobiology. It sort of was functioning like a human brain or like mycelium or something like that. Here's her map of San, which is actually a map of Denmark. This stuff, and then when you go up this spiral staircase, that leads you. Oh, well, actually, you'll look into this. This is their sleeping quarters, which was also, you have this old video camera, it was like recording people sleeping, so it was like as though people would be sleeping in this bunker, but also being studied. And then you go upstairs, and then you're in this full, like, kind of psychedelic chill-out lounge, which was all made of ceramics and mosaic panels.
We were looking at a lot of the work of the Cobra collective that Asger Jorn really sort of was leading, that became, I guess it moved into the Situationist International. And so there was a lot of ceramic work that we were trying to emulate. So that's sort of the historical anchor for that.
And then we built a movie theater with a bunch of first-class airplane seats, where we showed the San trilogy and Mercury City there, which was shot in Cleveland. And again, and then when you would leave, you would go out through this long tunnel. And so you would go out a different way that you came in. And you came in an open field, and you would come out through this barn library, and you'd come out into like this kind of ravine that overlooked this like stream, and you were on this like stone path that you can see out over. It's like you can't really see the stream from here, but it's sort of like you went in one place, you came out in another. This actually intersected with an Andy Goldsworthy, which was some negotiation we had to deal with. So this brings us to the piece Colony Sound, which was the second chapter in this series, The Smile Pentagon. And this started to deal with, like, you had this alternative information technology called the Smile, and this was sort of abandoned by the industrial mainstream and then taken up by the counterculture and created Colony Sound, which was, you can imagine any kind of underground music counterculture like hip hop or punk or the psychedelic music of the 60s, where they're kind of taking something and reworking it and making it their own, Detroit techno being another example, whereas actually like the technology itself was defining what the music became. And so this here is the first room, which was kind of like another, what we'd imagined like a big box store that's been abandoned. And in here you had, you can't really see it, but these display cases had all these cell phones that would connect to this like a neurobiological information network. And then you'd go through these red doors into a hallway that would lead you into a domestic setting, which was like another kind of like retail environment that had been refashioned as someone's house. So people had taken this like retail architecture and made it into their home, like squatters, as it were. So you can see one of the kiosks had been turned into a bunk bed. And then this led into a long industrial hallway.
And this is sort of the beginning of this, like, let's use the museum as a studio. And we were taking elements that were in their storage and recombining them to create these kind of industrial-like spaces. And some of that stuff has come all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to go upstairs.
Yeah, you'll see some recycled elements that we brought from Sunset Corridor, brought from Colony Sound into Sunset Corridor. So this next room that's coming up, this was meant to be the sort of incubator for this plant mineral hybrid technology that was being used to power this neurobiological information network. And this, again, all this medical equipment that we've been repurposed. And then you go into this room that was entirely sheathed in copper, and was, we had all these paintings on copper. And so the idea about copper is that copper is used in, it can be a shield for electromagnetic frequencies. Like so MRI machines and things like that are often built inside copper rooms because things can't get in or get out. So this seemed like an appropriate type of space to use for this project about like the transfer of information via like electricity, electromagnetic waves, that kind of thing. And then this room leads into a burnt recording studio. So we'd made a recording studio all out of wax. We cast all the recording equipment out of wax, and then we melted a lot of it, and then we created this room that was entirely incinerated. And this was based on Lee Scratch Perry's Black Ark Studio, which was a famous recording studio in Jamaica, where they did a lot of famous reggae records and dub records. And he was constantly burning it down, or he burned it down twice or 3 times.
I think 3 times.
3 times, because like to exorcise it of demonic spirits. When it had bad vibes from a bad recording session, he would light it on fire.
So our friend Evie and his wife Elizabeth Hart were working with Lee Scratch Perry at the time, and we got a bespoke Lee Scratch Perry song out of it.
Yeah, which is in the film that's upstairs in Sunset Corridor. And so this was the final room here, which was a sort of hybrid of an office environment and a geodesic dome, which I think really embodies this idea of the California ideology, where you do have this merger of corporations and counterculture, and which has also gotten a little right wing in recent years with people like Mark Andreessen and Elon Musk. Here's a computer made out of rice, which there's some of that upstairs as well. And that brings us up to date. So.
We have a few minutes for questions.
Did you point at me?
I pointed right at you.
Yes. Thank you for this masterclass in materiality. Fascinating. It's like if Namjoon Pike and a junkyard dog was into interior design at an ayahuasca retreat. Because of the way these environments have built on each other over time, and you guys kind of tend to stay in this like just since, I don't know, it just has this great sense of becoming in each piece. How has the starting point for each project changed over time? I'd imagine they're all different, but like where does one piece begin for you all right now as opposed to when you started?
I think it's like really like a series of interlocking Venn diagrams. I mean, you get interested in something, we conceive of a bunch of rooms, we have lists of rooms, lists of ideas, and we're kind of talking about them, and generally our ambitions are bigger than what's possible, either physically or monetarily or whatever. So a lot of things get left on the cutting room floor, and then you kind of, when you get the next one comes along, you're like, oh, we'll pick up there. In the case of the Smile and this recent project, that was just a big idea that we started in 2019, or 2018 rather. And so it just seemed like there was more to investigate, and that's kind of the idea is there's always more to investigate. So we generally start off where we left off, and there's often recycling. You see there's imagery and logos and narratives that are being recycled throughout. And I think that that's part of this idea of kind of creating this cohesive universe, is all these things are part of one giant interior in a way.
All the way to the back.
Thank you for this exhibition. It looks great. I guess my question is, are you prototyping or storyboarding this? Or, I mean, if I try to do something like this, it would look real half-assed. But you guys did not look half-assed. So how are you, I mean, you just don't come here and come up with all these ideas. So it must require some pre-planning or something like that, I assume.
There's a lot of pre-planning. Storyboarding is the absolute correct term for this. There's always this question, and I think imagination about what our studio looks like. Does our studio look like this? Do you live like that? And we don't, so it looks much more like, almost like there's a lot of just large prints of storyboards, whether that's text or images or a combination of the both of them, and these sort of almost like flow charts, diagrams. It is a lot to try to hold, and so we try to assist ourselves in any way that we can, and that is through, these kind of classical elements of just like an index maybe, So, and it's, the studio itself is mostly books and tables and a kind of like collage process of taking bits and pieces from all these disparate kinds of areas, and trying to make some kind of sense.
What's next?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, there's one thing we didn't show you was that there was a piece in between Colony Sound and this called Nova Heat, which involved a planetarium, and we made a planetarium film for that. And it was like the piece that we actualized was part of this festival in Bentonville, Arkansas called Format, and it had 5 rooms around a center dome that had a planetarium in it. And we've always conceived of that as being a much larger piece where you'd have a kind of nautilus path into this dome, so it would be more like 12 to 20 rooms leading into this planetarium in the center. And so this, of course, would be a very expensive, very intensive process that would be large. So we haven't quite found the place for that, but we'd like to.
Yeah, and in the meantime, there is an ambition to just tour the planetarium film. Planetariums are kind of, well, they're almost of a certain era that's a bygone era. You think of like Pink Floyd laser light shows or like Natural History Museum kind of like origin stories of the cosmos, But it'd be nice to kind of take a United States tour of planetariums. It seems like a great way to spend time. So there is some research going into that. But it's sort of hard to find. I mean, I can't help but notice that dome next door, though, Go ahead.
Hello, thank you guys so much for this wonderful lecture. I was wondering, how did y'all meet? how long have you been working together? How long have you, whenever you originally started working together, was it always with these architectural installations, that involve sculpture, painting?
Well,
I guess tell us background.
Yeah, we met when I was at Columbia doing the MFA program, and Jonah was looking for places to film, sets and sites for his film, The Franklin Abraham. And, the building that I was in, it's called Prentice, which was the location for both the experimental electronic music program, and it was the former site of a component of the Manhattan Project. So you've already got the Cold War, and you've already have the sort of experimental audio research, which is something that has found its way into our work as a kind of a background. So it would be, 2 years later.
That was in 2003, because I shot in 2003.
Right.
Film.
Right.
So Justin had taken apart a van and had it in his studio, so I was like, this could be an interesting place to shoot. Although I didn't end up shooting in this van that was in his studio. I did shoot in that building, which had like a stream running through the basement that was used as part of the Manhattan Project to cool some of their crazy equipment. But anyway, that's how we sort of knew each other from, and then it was like the New York art world where everybody kind of mixes together, especially at that age in our late 20s. And so then we ended up in a studio building together across the hall from each other. And we were both working in these, immersive, like environmental strategies, I guess you would say. I had done things that were slightly more minimal, that were more, just focusing on the lights and kind of defining spaces through simple, metropolitan materials like glass and like aluminum and theatrical light. And Justin was taking apart vans and things like that.
Ice cream trucks, I know.
But anyway, it seemed interesting to kind of merge these sensibilities, and then we had a lot of some of the historical references and the music references were all, we had a lot of symbiosis there, and so there was a lot of brainstorming, because this kind of work is, it's not the kind of thing you do every day in your studio. It's a lot of it's like scheming and dreaming, and so we could sort of do that together. And then a friend of ours said, why don't you make a proposal to Ballroom, Marfa? They're new, they're doing cool things, so that's how it all started. And as you can see, I think that in some ways the collaboration came out fully formed. Like I think that the ideas that are in that first show are still here. Like we've just been kind of working on variations of those themes and, elaborating, of course, and bringing new elements into each show. But, we're definitely, we've stuck with that program.
Yeah, it's a very particular project that we're involved in, and so you're just trying to really build towards articulation. And sometimes that just requires a lot of research and some time to let these ideas settle and mutate and find their kind of material that's appropriate. The creativity is a little bit endless, but it hits the wall with time and money, and so, what doesn't, right?
Well, one more question.
Okay. Since all your installations sort of have they're all in one universe, right? Like the Samsung trilogy, and each installation sort of has like a narrative through line. My question is, how do you make sure that one narrative from one installation doesn't contradict with the other?
Well, they definitely contradict with each other.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do you make sure that it's all, it flows, it doesn't contradict what came before?
Well, I think that, we're world building, and the world is totally chaotic and sloppy and contradictory and, harmonious and beautiful and all those things, So it's just like any kind of collage making. It isn't that you like every element that's in there. And the most important thing is that there's some tension, and that you put things side by side that shouldn't be side by side to arrive at something new. So we just embrace that, I think is really the key to it.
And I think that, that science fiction has been kind of the bedrock of this whole approach. I mean, not in a sense of like being futurist where we're trying to predict like some distant time period, but more of a parallel thing. We're very inspired by J.G. Ballard and Philip K. Dick and William S. Burroughs and William Gibson, people like that, who are these sort of world next door type things. And when we're doing that, it sort of allows yourself the freedom to kind of like have things be a little absurd, like an information network that's made from plants, or things like that, or a giant city that there's like sort of improbable metropolitan type architecture. And so I think it's just the benefit of working in art allows you to sort of let loose a bit, and whereas if we were in the social sciences or documentary film or even maybe in a narrative film in Hollywood, you would have to sort of hold to some guidelines that we just don't have to.
Yeah, and I think that the science fiction tools of dealing with time really allows us to not have to hold on to any kind of linear fashion. Like this idea of time being out of joint, allows you to kind of, well, you'll see it in the films here, you can kind of come in at any point, and the years and the dates are constantly being jumbled up, so that it just sort of allows to, I guess, portray a much more complex story.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dustin and Jonah. I think you all go upstairs, see the show. We're going to leave today if you have a chance. But thank you guys so